We're live.
Thank you. It's 9 o'clock and I'll now open the Growth, Infrastructure and Waste Committee open now today. I will note council attendance, that all councillors are in attendance, and good morning to you all. We have no council apologies. And we'll go straight to the declarations of interest in matters on the agenda, and thank you Councillor Fechner for highlighting a conflict of interest. Would you like to
So thank you, Mayor. In accordance with Section 175C2 of the Local Government Act of 2009, I declare that my brother has a material that I have a material personal interest in item number 10, named number, is it 8? I beg your pardon, Mayor.
I think it's supposed to be 9, but I think on the agenda here it'll be as 8. So yes. Today's
agenda number 8, entitled Electrical Trade Services Tender, number 13437, because my brother is the proprietor of Blackspark Electrical. I plan on dealing with that by leaving the meeting while the matter is discussed and voted on.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fick. I do know the notes they were classed as a non-confirming tender anyway, but thank you very much for disclosing that. And just letting people know, and obviously here, that there's a bit of a glitch at our numbering of agenda items online. So whilst the first item on the agenda is confirmation of the minutes, I think online you will see that that doesn't have a number, and number 1's been going to the next item, which is the public transport improvement. So I'll call it the agenda items as they should be, but also the title, just to make sure there's no confusion. I apologise for that. So move on first to the confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of September 2020. May I have someone move that, please? Thank you, Councillor Ireland. A seconder, Councillor Doyle, thank you very much. I now open them up for discussion. Any questions? In that case, I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour may please raise your hand. I can see that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Now go to item 2, which is the Public Transport Improvement Priority List of Projects, Sustainable Travel Sub-Program. And you'll see today we've got a number of, I'll just read through how many. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 agenda items here, just talking about putting items on a priority list for when we go into budget discussions. So the first one of these is this Public Transport Improvement Priority List of Projects. May I have a mover, please? Thank you, Councillor Cornselman. And a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Doyle. Milligan, sorry. Would anyone like to bring the relevant council officer up to discuss this?
I just have a question on one of them.
Yep. May I ask for the relevant council officer to do that? Thank you, Mr. Dilio. So your name and title, please?
Yeah, Tony DeLeo, Manager Infrastructure Strategy. Thank you, Chair. Would you like me to talk to the report or simply answer the question?
Oh, just a simple question, I hope. The fourth one down in attachment 3 just says Kruger Parade opposite Henderson Street. Is that a bus stand, stop, shelter, indent? What is it?
So fourth one down, that's the Kruger Parade opposite Henderson Street. I'd have to check to see exactly what the scope of works is there. Generally these projects are improvements to bus stops to make them DDA compliant. So they meet the Disability Discrimination Act, and we're working through all of our bus stop infrastructure to meet the requirements or our obligations to be DDA compliant by the end of 2022. So the work there would be something related to the DDA compliance, whether it's an indent or modifying the stop or the shelter to meet those compliance requirements. I'm not too sure, Councillor Tully, but we can certainly find that out and provide that information.
Thank you.
Any other questions of Mr. Dilio? Yes, Councillor Fickner?
Probably just an overarching question with regards to all of the items pertaining to methodology coming to us today. I acknowledge that the lists provided are not 100% up to date, but after having a discussion with you earlier this week, I understand that the department is making headway to finalise these lists and have them to us. Will those lists potentially, based on the prioritisations within the sub-programs, be available for the public to look at? Is that information that will eventually be publicly available? So if someone calls the call centre and they request for something to happen in their particular suburb or on their street, then the department prioritises that based on the methodology we endorse today. Will then they be able to see that on a list somewhere to see what score it was potentially given? I think that it might be good context to give if we're allowed to supply that information to the public as well.
Certainly, Councillor. My understanding is these committee reports are available to the public. So the listing as provided as attachment 3 in this report, as similar listings in all of the reports that are submitted today, I expect would be available to the public should they wish to see them. Certainly, the lists are constantly being reviewed. So as new requests come in for projects to be considered, they are considered, assessed and prioritised, and then all of those priorities come and are used to develop the capital works portfolio right up until when the budget is adopted. So if there is a project that a councillor or a constituent wishes to raise, they will be assessed and prioritised, and we can certainly provide where that project is within the priority list to yourselves or the constituent.
Yeah, and just acknowledging that sometimes it's difficult to dig through agendas on the website to find particular attachments, and sometimes they're not as legible as you'd probably like them to be, just because of the nature of the way that they're scanned into the document. So I was hoping for more of like, maybe it's a 6-monthly update of the particular list that we could list somewhere, so that people know where to go to find this kind of information, if possible.
Maybe it's something we could discuss in discussion, Councillor Pittman, of what we'd like to have out there.
Through the chair, we could, obviously there were some priority listings that came to committee last month. There is 6 or 7 on the agenda today. There will be some next committee and some in the December committee. At that point, I expect all the priority project listings to be complete, and so we could provide at that point the full priority lists to all councillors for their information in a form that's easily understood and read.
Thank you.
Through the Chair.
Thank you.
Just to support Councillor Fechner's concept there, yesterday I actually extracted from the public viewing copy of the agenda to a constituent who I've been in contact with regard to one of the priority listings in one of the items on the agenda today. Because people are following it, they're concerned about their road or their public transport or their cycle path or whatever the item may be. So definitely having it, as Councillor Fechner has suggested, having it easily available on the website would be a fantastic idea, I think. And that way, if a councillor receives a query, or if anyone in the organisation, it's simply emailing a link rather than a document which may not be as digestible. Would it be prudent at this stage, this being the first of the items, Chair, that maybe the technical officer provides that overarching total background as to why these have come through committee today?
Feel free to ask, Mr. Dillio.
If you may, Mr. Dillio.
So certainly, as annually as part of the capital portfolio development, which leads into council adopting a capital works program, there are many programs and sub-programs that make up that capital portfolio. Each of the sub-programs have a number of different project listings, and you will see in attachment A, or attachment 1, where this particular project listing fits in within the capital portfolio. So there are many project listings. They are each assessed based on a methodology to prioritise those projects, and then those priority projects are used to inform the capital budget build. So what we're doing today and through a series of reports coming up to committee is to provide those priority listings so that you understand what the priority projects are, and those priority projects are used to inform and build the capital portfolio.
Yeah, that would be, for any member of the public viewing today, would be that explanation then lets them know why this information is used and how.
Thank you, Councillor William. I'm looking at the attachment 2, which is page 23 of 147. And this is something we've discussed in briefings, Mr Gilio, but obviously we're looking at the prioritisation method, we're looking at the site type, patronage data, vulnerable user group and traffic user generator. Is there a waiting, or how do we look at requests that have come in through the service centre when people have asked for work to be done, just so they wish to have a bus shelter build or something different? How is that taken into consideration in the prioritisation methodology?
So each site is assessed using that criteria. So with the site type, depending on what site type it is, it gets a particular score. That score, as you can see from attachment 2, is also weighted, which then, once the score is weighted, then you get a score, and then those are added together to give an overall score.
So if we have, let's just say we have 200 residents ring up about a certain bus stop, they'd like to have a bus shelter or to change something that's a bit more DDA compliant, would that be categorised in any of those criteria, or
Yes.
It's not?
Yeah,
Which one?
each project, all of them. So the project or the
Yes.
site would be assessed against all of that criteria and given an overall score.
I understand that, but what I'm looking at is if people have run the service centre
Yep.
and would like to have something upgraded, where does that fit in? Which criteria does that fit in? Does it fit into site type? It doesn't fit into patronage data or vulnerable user group or traffic user generator. Where would it sit in?
So each site that criteria is used in every site.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
I think we're having a disconnect.
To you, may I?
Yes,
May
Councillor
I
Fickner?
interject just
Yeah.
momentarily? The volume of the requests is not considered in the current methodology listed in attachment number 2.
I agree with that.
But think about potential stacking of the phone centre if people are saying, well, let's all 700 of us call up.
Yeah.
I think that it's based on other, very reasonable methodology points like traffic numbers, like how regular the bus stops are, and I think that's where I think that's going there.
So when people ring the service, it's not assessed on how many people have rung the service centre?
No, sorry, I missed the point there, Chair.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not assessed on how many people.
Through the Chair,
Thank you.
Mr Gillo, just so I can be clear then, whether the service centre receives 1 call or 200 calls in relation to one particular bus stop, the 100 or 200 calls is enough only to trigger a look at that particular stop, and then it will be assessed based on that criteria.
That's correct, Councillor Doyle.
Wonderful.
And if I might make a comment, ultimately, while staff will put a proposed list to council will then apply its own filters over the top and determine the priority within the lists that we identify. So some of those issues that you're raising can be applied, and a bit more subjective analysis can be applied as we move forward in the budget process.
Through the Chair, thank you, Mr Farmer. So I was going to ask that, is there any type of subjective analysis or overlay applied to this, which would then potentially lead to the ability for a priority change?
So certainly this is the technical
How
assessment.
much flex is within this, I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, this is quite, fixed in terms of its methodology. Certainly we can reconsider the methodology if there are elements in there, either the criteria itself or the weighting, if council feels as though some of that may need to be reconsidered. That certainly can be reconsidered, which is why the methodology is placed in front of you. And as the CEO has pointed out, through budget deliberations, that's where council can apply its own subjective views at that point.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, so typically a council will go through these and they'll look at something and they say it's number 5 on the list, it's not going to get a go. We believe collectively that it is more important. We've been out and assessed it, we've applied, an assessment and it gets moved. So that's, that's the rule of sort of 5 votes. Councillor.
So
Mr. Dill.
yeah, so I think Councillor Madsen, do you have your hand up before?
Oh, no.
No, thank you. Thank you. So did Mr. Dill wish to add anything? That is fine. Any other questions of Mr. Dilio? Thank you, Mr. Dilio. I'll open up for discussion. My point was to look at, I'm not wanting to change the technical assessment. I just want to make sure that, because when we've had our formal briefings, when people come to us with suggestions, we have been referring them to the service centre as accordance to the new council policies, and we just want to make sure that each person that does call about an intersection or a footpath, that it is actually assessed. It is in the list, and it is assessed against this technical assessment before it does come to us. So I think it was just very important for people to know that each of those requests is looked at.
Through the chair, and yes, I concur. Councillor Bettner and I have been doing quite considerable amount of work looking through the data and the methodologies, and council officers have been very helpful in helping us understand, and we acknowledge that as councillors we don't have the technical knowledge or experience that the council officers do, but we certainly also acknowledge that we represent our constituents, and often it's the community that has very valuable insight and input, so we're just trying to work out how that can fit and influence.
I guess use our judgment based
Yeah.
on the technical knowledge and our dealings with the residents.
To you, Matt. I just want to highlight the importance of us endorsing this methodology today. And this is the last time that I'll speak to it, because this is the sentiment that will be carried over the next few items. That just to make sure that we're all in agreement and we accept that this is true and a fair way to assess these particular projects, and just highlighting that when an assessment is made, sometimes that's just a moment in time, and community sentiment might not reflect the technical report. But I think that when new information comes to light, particularly through us as councillors and listening to the community, we have the ability to have that reassessed as well and provide more information, potentially even greater information than was originally provided. So I think that there is movement in there, but the overall methodology that's been created by the department, upon reading the agenda, I think is very reasonable and a fair way to deal with all of the requests that come through to council.
Thank you, Councillor Fechner.
Just as a comment.
Councillor Madsen?
Thank you. I would just concur with Andrew. It's always important to
Councillor
remember. Well, Councillor Fechner. Procedure is very important. That we're making decisions under scarcity here. So we can't build Ipswich in a day. We can't build it in a year. We've got a number of projects. There has to be a methodology to say where the need is greater. And often in a political environment such as we operate in, there's loud chatter back and forth by groups, but that may not actually represent the greater populations out there. So a rigorous methodology like this is really important to ensure that projects happen in a productive sequence, as opposed to whoever's just yelling the most.
Mayor, and I concur with Councillor Madsen's comments. Councillor Fechner and I have recently been presented with an example of where I guess an individual, a political individual, may have had a louder voice and influenced council officers on a particular road, and some years on we are now seeing the consequences, the negative consequences of that, because the technical methodology and priorities weren't adhered to.
No, thank you. I thought it was very good to talk about the technical advice that we get, and obviously as the democratically elected representatives, that technical basis that we use to make decisions, and based on feedback from residents as well. So thank you. In that case, I'll go back to the recommendation, which is that the prioritised list of public transport improvements as detailed in attachment 3 of the report by the Technical Officer Traffic dated the 10th of September 2020 be considered when developing Council's next capital works portfolio. It's already been moved and seconded. I'll now put it to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Yes, it's unanimous. Thank you very much. We'll move on to the next item, which is the Cycle Safety and Mobility Improvements Priority List of Projects, the Sustainable Travel Sub-Program. May I please have a mover for this recommendation? Councillor Doyle, thank you very much. And a seconder, Councillor Fechner. Thank you very much. Now that recommendation is that the prioritised list of cycle safety and mobility improvements as detailed in attachment 3 to the report by the Technical Officer Traffic dated 11th of September 2020 be considered when developing Council's next capital works portfolio. Do we wish to call for the relevant Council Officer, or we're happy to go straight to discussion? Go straight to discussion. Are there any discussion points anyone would like to point out? This list of this big long list. Only point out I'm grateful for the technical assessment that goes on by IED department. If there's no discussion, I'll put it straight to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. I see that's unanimous. Thank you very much. We now go to the next item on the agenda, which is the Principal Cycle Priority List of Projects, Sustainable Travel Sub-Program. The recommendation in the report is that the prioritised list of principal cycle projects as detailed in attachment 2 to the report by the Senior Transport Planner dated the 11th of September 2020 be considered when developing Council's next capital works portfolio. May I have a mover, please? Thank you, Councillor Fechner. And a seconder, Councillor Cornselman. Thank you very much. We wish to call the relevant Council Officer. No, I'll move on to discussion. Is there any discussion on the list of the cycle priority list?
Through the Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Milligan.
This item details, of course, has obviously financial resource implications. The explanation there, would it be fair to assume that considering Tuesday night's federal budget that some of that may change?
Yes, very well could. Obviously, we received nearly $10 million from the federal government for the local roads and community infrastructure. Yes, I guess that is being put through council. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, the underlying issue is we will factor that additional funding into the budget deliberation. So an amount of that was already announced previously, and there's been a supplemental amount that is announced in the budget, and so we will effectively expand our budget, our capital program, to assist this. So some of these projects that normally may not just these, but some projects that may not have been able to be funded will now be able to be funded.
Any other discussion? No, I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous. Thank you. Move on to the next item, which is the IGO Active Transport Action Plan Implementation Priority List of Locations, the Sustainable Travel Sub-Program. And that recommendation is that the prioritised list of IGO Active Transport Action Plan Implementation Projects, as detailed in Attachment 3 to the report by the Technical Officer Traffic dated the 10th of September 2020, be considered when developing Council's next capital works portfolio. May I have a mover, please? Thank you, Councillor Cornwall. A seconder, Councillor Milligan, thank you. Would like to bring down the relevant Council Officer?
Yeah,
Councillor Tolley, yes. So, Mr. Dillier?
Tony DeLeo, Manager, Infrastructure Strategy.
I've just got a query about the way the reports are prepared, and if in the future we get some more detailed information. But it just says, for example, Goodna Town Centre, within 1.2 kilometres of the radius of the Goodna Town Centre, or Westside Christian College, within
page-
400 metres.
What
This is
page are you on,
attachment
Councillor
3.
Tully? Attachment 3.
Attachment 3. To say some work's going to occur within 1.2 kilometres of radius of the town centre doesn't mean much.
Councillor Tully, the way this project listing works is it's looking to provide the provisions for active transport, so that whether that be walking or cycling.
Yes.
So the priority locations, so what it looks at is zones, and around those traffic generators, so whether that be town centres, schools, public transport nodes, within a 400 metre radius of that, we look to undertake projects that provide the footpath connectivity or the footpath upgrades or the cycle connectivity or cycle upgrades within that zone. So once we've got the identified zone or location, we work within those radiuses, and we try and provide the requirements from a footpath or pedestrian and cycle perspective. So the scope of the actual works is yet to be determined, the full scope, but certainly the priority locations are what's shown in attachment 3.
Right, through the chair. But to determine those zones, you must have done an assessment that there's work required within that zone.
That's correct. So the work that was done as part of the Active Transport Action Plan, it identifies the priority locations. So that is what has driven a lot of these prioritised listings in terms of their locations.
So we'll just use Goodna Town Centre as an example. Within the 1.2 kilometres, you've identified specific possible projects within that.
That's correct.
So where does that information sit?
In the Active Transport Action Plan.
Okay. And when a decision will be made through this committee as to which specific projects will be undertaken?
So if the priority location gets adopted into the budget,
Yes.
then we will scope up the potential projects that will make up that piece of work, and obviously we will inform and talk to councillors as part of that work.
Through the chair. So for each of these, there must be at least one project and possibly multiple potential projects for each zone.
I would suggest there would be multiple projects, whether it be footpath or cycle improvements within those zones.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr DeLeo, will we be provided with that detail as part of the budget deliberations that we start the end of this month?
Certainly, as part of the budget build, if that request is made, we can certainly look to provide some of that detail.
Any other questions? No? Thank you, Mr DeLeo. I'll leave that open for discussion. Was there anything you'd like to add, Mr Tully? Councillor Tully?
No, I'm not.
There being no more discussion, I will then open to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. I think it's unanimous. We now go on to the next item, which is the sealing of gravel roads, a priority list of projects in the Sealing Gravel Roads sub-program. The recommendation is that the prioritised list of Sealing Gravel Roads project, as detailed attachment 3 of the report, be considered when developing Council's next capital works portfolio. May I have a mover, please? Councillor Milligan, and a seconder, Councillor Fechner. Would we like to bring the relevant council officer for any questions? No? Then I'll open it up for discussion. And I'll just open up just letting people know that we have a workshop planned. I think now it's been moved to the 29th or the 27th of October for a rural roads policy workshop for councils in the lead up to our budget build. So I think we'll be looking forward to doing that. Any further discussion? Nope. I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And it's unanimous. Thank you. We go on to the next item on the agenda, which is the Local Drainage Improvement Priority List of Projects, which is the Local Drainage Sub-Program. And the recommendation is that prioritised list of local drainage improvements as detailed in Attachment 3 be considered when developing Council's next capital works portfolio. May I have a mover, please? Councillor Kunzelman, thank you very much. Seconded by Councillor Milligan. Thank you. Do we wish to speak to the relevant council officer on this matter? No? Okay, so I open up for discussion. There being no discussion, I'll move forward to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. It's unanimous. Move on to the next item, which is the priority list of natural area estate projects 2021-2022, the Enviro Plan Capital Works Portfolio Sub-Program. That recommendation in the report is that the prioritised list of natural area estate projects as detailed in Attachment 1 to the report be considered when developing Council's next capital works portfolio. May I have a mover for that? Thank you, Councillor Kunzelman. And a second, Councillor Fechner. Thank you very much. Do we wish to question the relevant council officer?
Just a question through you. Again, on the report, it's got codes for location, which I suppose you could work out, like WRS, MCE and RNEP. Could we have a legend in future, and could we be given the legend what it is now at the base of that page?
So you're looking at page 87, and the location has a number of WRS, MCE. Is that the column that you're asking?
Yeah, that's probably really, for the officers, it's sort of first day 101 descriptors, but it doesn't mean anything to me.
CEO, are you aware of what the acronyms stand for?
Ms Kavanagh might be the assistant.
No, I'm not asking for now, but it might be beneficial. But I'm saying certainly for the future, if there could at least be a legend on the bottom of that page of what each one refers to.
So if we could do that. In the meantime, could we find out what those actual...
Yeah.
If you come back. Thank you, Ms Kavanagh.
I have them here. This is what you're talking about. WRSMCE, White Rock Spring Mountain Conservation Estate. RNEP, Environmental Park. MGCE, Mount Grandchester Conservation Estate. FGCE, Flinders Gilman Conservation Estate. And RRR is Redbank Rifle Range.
Thank you very much. I think you sit down now, Ms Kavanagh.
Did that take long to work that out?
I think no.
I just asked, that's all.
Thank you, Councillor.
No, just through often these descriptors just get used so often by staff and us sometimes, different things. But the end users are the ones who sort of often struggle.
Yes. Thank you. And I think Councillor Fechner did have his hand up before. Councillor Fechner, did you wish to ask Ms Kavanagh?
I just through you, Mayor, I would like to ask Ms Kavanagh when the methodology for the prioritisation was reviewed, just noting on page 84 of 147, fire management is weighted at 20%. I was wondering if that has gone up or down in light of recent events. So public health and safety is the top weighting priority at 25% and fire management at 20%. I was just wondering when this particular methodology was reviewed and if fire management has actually increased in its weighting value because of the dry season.
Yeah, it is rated each year.
Yep.
Well, whether that's changed since past years, I'd have to go back and have a look. I'm more than happy to do that.
Okay,
I would imagine with the public health and safety and fire together, at the 45%, it does give it quite a high weighting as the primary thing. A lot of our fire management is also actually done through the operational budget, so that primarily is kind of there. With this, it's more if a service trail contributes towards a fire management outcome, then it gets that weighting through this process as well.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I think Councillor Kunzelman had a question.
I was going to make a statement about acronyms in general.
I'll probably do that after the questions, if it's okay. Any other questions for Ms Kavanagh? Thank you, Ms Kavanagh.
Thank you.
I'll open it out for discussion. Councillor Kunzelman?
I've got a thing about this, I know, but acronyms take so much time to find. They're such a waste of time. It's like a secret language. I come from health industry, and I think that that's where probably this is even worse. But here, I just find it such a waste of time if I'm trying to get through a mass of information to work out what the acronyms are as well.
Okay, thank you. So I think so we'll make sure that that we don't have acronyms or we have a legend as per proper style manual and all that sort of stuff. Thank you. Councillor Constable. Is there any other discussion on this item?
Yeah, just through you, Mayor, I think it's worthwhile noting for the benefit of council and for the public that the conservation value weighting is 15%. So when it comes to achieving, koala offsets for improving the natural area, that's actually quite low in the weighting as to how we spend our Enviro Plan money. So I think that it's just worth noting for all that obviously the highest priority is public health and safety and fire management, which I guess kind of feeds into the protection of land anyway. But that the conservation value is at 15%. So if there are people out there in the community, that are absolutely convinced that a parcel of land will help us achieve our overall conservation outcomes for the area, that there are actually other considerations that are being made as per the methodology listed here.
Well noted, Councillor Fickner.
Great.
Any other discussion? I'll put to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And it's unanimous. Thank you. We'll now move on to the next, and I think it's item on the electoral trade services tender. So, Councillor Fickner. The next item is the electoral trade services tender number 13437, and there are 4 recommendations within this. So I won't read them out. They're there for all of us to see there. I'm seeking a mover for this one. Thank you, Councillor Doyle, and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Ireland. Thank you very much. May I ask the relevant council officer to come forward, please?
Richard White, Manager of Procurement.
Thank you, Mr White. I think with our Buy Ipswich procurement policy, could you please tell me if the suppliers that we're putting forward are local suppliers?
One of the suppliers, or the lead supplier, so the one that will get the primary supply of work out of this, has a branch office in Ipswich. Head office is down in Sydney. However, they are employing 35 Ipswich locals, including 5 full-time apprentices in the Ipswich area. The second one that's recommended, T2, has a Brisbane head office. However, they do employ 10 people in the Ipswich area. They don't have a branch office in Ipswich, however. And the third secondary supplier, or the second secondary supplier, J&P, have a Wacol head office. Up until 2018, they did have a sub-office in Ipswich, but they've consolidated and moved to Wacol, which is just on the border. They do employ 110 locals, Ipswich local residents. And as I said, had a depot here from 1980 to 2018. So.
Okay. Thank you. Would you mind just running through why this presents value for money for the people of Ipswich?
Yeah, so this relates to the delivery of safe management, operations and maintenance of electrical assets throughout Ipswich council assets. For us, it is best to get this onto a single contract that we can use as a preferred supply arrangement. So it provides us the flexibility to go to Stowe as the lead supplier for smaller pieces of work that we don't want to go out and do individual quotes for. We've got a set price and basket of goods here. After that, we then make the choice. So we do have the choice for all 3 to be quoting. So it's a $100,000 thing that we think we can drive value for. We've got essentially a pre-qualified list here that we can go to that we know can do the job and that are local or have local assets, that we can do the quote. If it's over $200,000, so where we can really start driving value for money, this contract won't be utilised and we will actually go out for open tender. So there's a good weight and balance there between using a contract here to get our services quickly when we need them, and to make sure that we always are able to service our assets, and then also waiting when we need to consider price and drive better value.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of Mr. White?
Mr. White,
Yes.
it's probably more of a comment for yourself rather than a question. In our recent briefing given by yourself on this matter, you mentioned that those businesses that were unsuccessful in the tender process were contacted by council officers and they received feedback.
They haven't been contacted yet.
No, just generally, sorry, within the process they will be contacted,
Yes,
and
100%, that's right.
opportunity to, I guess, work with council and develop and understand where they didn't meet tender requirements, and I just want to emphasise the importance of doing that, and it probably feeds into our policy around being a small business friendly council, noting as we move to our buy local policy, there will be a number of local businesses who are probably technically very competent, but due to the small size of their business, they may not have the right policies and procedures in place to meet our tender requirements. So it's just important that
Fully
we do
agree.
put them in contact with the relevant areas in council that can help them.
Yeah, and we would
develop.
hope to lead that conversation
Yeah,
with procurement. It's one of the benefits of a centralised procurement branch, that we can start seeing that across the more tenders we're running, to be able to start seeing those lessons, have those conversations and start taking actions to try and remediate them before the next. So what kind of workshops can we run in the community? What kind of information can we
Great.
be publishing? What do we learn from our tender documents that we can be putting into future tender documents as info sheets, or simplifying language where we can, those kind of things. So we're
Great.
definitely, and so they would be notified. This is chicken and egg situation. Coming to you today, you're authorising, we're asking you to authorise the CEO to finalise negotiations. We will contact them once we have a contract. However, probably from today, if they're watching,
Of
they'll
course.
have a fair idea that they
Yeah.
weren't successful. So there is a little lag there between when we touch base with them and where they're probably finding out today, if they're listening.
Thank you. And I appreciate that's a lot of work in your space that you need to do, but thank you for starting that
No, it's
important
the
piece
kind
of
of
work.
council we want to be.
Yeah, excellent.
Any other questions of Mr. White? No, thank you very much, Mr. White. I propose that we actually move all four of the recommendations together. They are basically, recommendation A is just approving that we do go into preferred supplier arrangement. Recommendation B is it resolving to go into that term, I guess, for 2 years. C is looking at the three suppliers as well as their total of $7,208.35 for this contract, and listing the three suppliers, and then allowing the CEO to actually go into negotiations. If there are no objections, I'll move. We've got the mover for the all four. Councillor Doyle,
So,
you okay with?
Oh, yes,
the-
yes.
Okay. So in that case, I'll put that to the vote. Those
well,
in,
before,
sorry, yes, Councillor.
through the chair, if I may also just make a general comment.
Oh, sorry.
Just in support of Councillor Doyle's comments before, with respect to the Ipswich City Council now being Queensland's first small business friendly council. I have had some feedback from our actions last week, and questions being, well, how are you going to display this? It's one thing to say that you are, but where is the follow through? And as Councillor Doyle had explained, those processes there where we then direct small businesses that would like to tender to council to the other internal resources of council that can assist them is one way of demonstrating that we are taking action on that and not just using hollow words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Wigan. I'll put those four recommendations to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. I'll see that's unanimous. I know that Councillor Fickner is not in the room. I'll now ask for Councillor Fickner to be brought back into the room before we move on to the next item. Thank you, Councillor Fickner. We'll move on to the next item, which is the Infrastructure and Environment Department's Capital Portfolio Financial Performance Report for August 2020. May I have a mover, please? Councillor Fichtner, and a seconded Councillor Kunzelmann. Thank you very much. And I ask for the relevant council officer to come forward.
Morning, Jeff Keach, Chief Financial Officer for Main Harding Councillors.
Thank you, Mr. Keach. Could you please sort of point out the highlights and the lowlights of the first
Sure.
2 months of this financial year?
Just before I do that, if you don't mind, Mayor and Councillors, just to give a bit of background to this report, because it's probably the first time that you've seen this one, in addition to what's normally our monthly one. Through the Mayor and the CEO, we're just requested to give a little bit more detail in relation to the overall capital performance in relation, at this stage, in relation to the IED capital portfolio. And as you can see there, we've tried to put together what we think might be some key information for councillors. Obviously, this is built up of sort of 300 or 400 odd individual projects up to what we've tried to summarise as some key reports. And we're very happy to work with you as we go forward into what information you want to see. This is the first draft, and happy to have changes and feedback as we go through. A couple of key things, if you don't mind. The overall portfolio is broken down into both. You can see the programs which we spoke about before, and then sub-programs. Overall, looking at both the month, the year to date, but also the key area in these is the forecast cost of completion. So each month the team will work with both finance and IED to say, well, this is the cost to date, but what is it actually going to be at the completion of the project? And so there's a column in there for the capital programs that says this is what it's likely to be against the final budget. So at a high level, currently you'll see that the overall infrastructure budget is about 80.1 million, and the current forecast is actually to exceed that at 81.7. And there's some key reasons for that. As you're aware, through the COVID stimulus grants, there were some programs that received funding, and at this stage in time, we only had the first part of that in the capital budget. So things like Sutton's Park was forecast to be in the next financial year. At this point in time, there's like 1.2 million that we might need to do in the budget amendment and bring that forward, which will close those gaps off. And things like New Caledonian Road. There's a couple of projects which are listed in there that you can see reference to those. Hardings Park is another one from there. So when we consider this as we move through the year, if we think we're going to overall exceed the 80.1 million, then through a budget amendment we would bring forward that expenditure from future years to offset that grant funding in that space. So that would close that gap up. And you can see on a year-to-date basis that the total expenditure is about 6.4 million compared to the 6.2 million budget. So where we've got the forecast expenditure, it seems to be in line with budget at the moment. But you will note in the various reports there's significant variances up and down across a number of projects. That's not unusual, and particularly in this early day where, as we've spoken before, some of the estimates, and then when they get into detailed design, what's the movement between what can be early works and what might be in relation to moving electrical works, and those sorts of things can influence those costings. So in summary, that's sort of at a very high level. Very happy to take questions in relation to the report. Might need some support from the IED if necessarily on some key projects, but happy to talk through some ones.
Could you please talk us through some of the key highlights?
Yep.
Probably key lowlights that we need to
Yep,
be
sure.
across as a board.
Yep, sure. Okay. So I mentioned a couple of projects there that, and happy to go through the individual each of the individual reports if you like, or just some top levels.
If you just give me the highlights.
Yeah, okay. So some key ones would be at the moment things like we mentioned Sutton's Park, etc., where we need to bring forward the budget for those and offset those. So Sutton's Road, New Caledonian Road, and Hardings Park there. One which we'd mention is Robertson Road Signal Project. It was originally forecast to have a budget of like 2.4 million. And is currently, based on the design forecast, to come in at around about 1.6, 1.7 million. So there's a forecast underspend at this point in time in relation to that project.
That one's had a bit of a bounce. I think when it first came, it was going to be 925,000,
Yeah.
then it went up to 2.4 million, and now it's
Back down to that level there, yeah. And these do move a little bit as they move through their life as things go, as things move forward. One other one to sort of highlight, Keely, would be Cobalt Street, which is through our black spot funding. That was originally with a budget of, I think, around about 1.2 million, and at the moment, as it's gone through detailed design, is forecast to be closer to 1.8 million. So that one would be a key one, because that was obviously going to be grant funded. as it stands there now, council would need to look to contribute the extras associated with that project. So they're probably the sort of key ones. As I said, there's numerous, particularly in the variances report, we've picked up like the top 10 major movements, and that would be the report that I'd refer you to in terms of the key sort of unders and overs for your information there.
Just through the Mayor. I'm looking specifically at Hardings Paddock Visitor Information Centre, where the current forecast is of additional expenditure of $441,000.
Yep.
Through IED, I have the spend for 20 to 2021 at 375,000. Does that mean it's an extra 441,000?
I think the Hardings Paddock one is one that's got budget in future years as well. I'll need to just doubly check that for you. From what I can see in the reference there, that it makes reference to the fact that it's a multi-year project, and it might be that it's because it's subject to the grant funding, I think, isn't it? I think from memory.
Yeah, it is.
So it'll be potentially one where we've actually need to bring the budget forward from future years to offset that. But I'm happy to take that on notice and confirm that for you, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Keach. Just through you, Mayor, again. When we scroll down and we're looking at page 131, please.
Yep.
And again, I just to flag to the group here, there's mention again just using Hardings Paddock, recognising that it's being brought forward with the forecast completion of 30 June. And this might not be a question for Mr. Keach, but it says, based on the latest schedule, however, it is at risk of not being completed by the end of the financial year. I just need clarification that the grant money that we'll be receiving for this particular project isn't conditional upon the completion by that date. And if it's not going to be completed by that date, what is the likelihood of it not being completed, and how does that affect our bottom line if we don't meet the conditions of a grant program and then we're out of pocket a further, $300,000 to $500,000?
Yep. I would need to take that one on notice, Councillor. Off my head, I wouldn't know the specifics on the schedule for that one. I'm not sure if Charlie, Mr. Dill's aware.
I think Mr. Dill would like to respond to that. Would that be correct? We'd like to come, yes, please, because of the microphones for the live streaming. So introduce yourself, please, and your title.
Good morning, all. Charlie Dill, General Manager, Infrastructure and Environment. Just to respond to that question around government-funded projects or externally funded projects, the note does say it is at risk. It's not necessarily reporting that it is now beyond the date. However, from time to time, when we do have slippages from external reasons like utility relocations, similar to the examples Jeff has provided before, we can go back to those funding agencies and seek an extension, and quite often they're granted. So, although it says it's at risk, we are watching and monitoring that the causes of that risk carefully, such that we're not pushed into that position. So.
Thanks,
That's how we manage those moving forward.
Councillor Cosman, you were
My question about the skate park at Sutton Park was much the same.
Yes.
If you could give us a breakdown of where the money's come from, please, and how much we're putting in.
I think the majority of that one is being funded now through the COVID stimulus grant.
I think from the state government.
From the state government, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
I know that.
Yes.
So the 1.2 is the total cost?
The total cost of the forecast cost of that one is, let me just go to that there, is 1.4.
1.4.
Yes. So currently we've only got 200,000 in the budget. We need to bring forward the 1.2 million to fund that to the total cost of 1.4.
And just through,
Councillor Johnny?
and you're comfortable with the variances at this stage year to date?
In total, yes. I mean, I think the important thing with this is to look at it at this stage at the program level.
Yeah.
What we've spoken about with the executive team and something to consider with this committee is as we go forward, where there's key variances in large projects, to bring that back to the committee and actually get approval to move the budget from one of those projects. Otherwise, all we end up doing is reporting underspends against those projects, and you get the same repeat every month. So one of the governance processes we'll look to bring forward is, say, something like Robinson Road or Cobalt Street. If we know in the next month or so that that's going to be locked in at those prices, and we would recommend and come back that we would, through this committee, not change the overall budget. If we change the overall budget, that requires a budget amendment through formal council. But if it's moving between some of those projects, we might look to bring that back and get agreement from this committee to move across those projects. And then, yes, certainly we will monitor within the individual project by project with the department those variances. At this stage, I'm comfortable where we stand overall, but there are some key movements which, as Mr Dill mentioned, are watching briefs at this stage early in the financial year from a risk perspective.
Through the chair, Mr Keach is comfortable, then I am comfortable.
The key focus is the overall program, making sure that we deliver on the program, and within the allocated budget. Movement within those does happen at times, and we do have some governance processes to keep track of those. But making sure we deliver the program within the allocated budget.
Through the chair.
Thank you,
Mr.
Councillor.
Keach,
Yes.
how often is there a surplus, money's left over?
One of the key questions with capital programs is that definition of surplus. Is the surplus as a result of true savings on projects or under delivery of program? And that's a key difference in my mind. So if you deliver the program and spend less, then that to me is a key surplus and savings. A lot of times in local government, it's often we don't deliver the whole capital program and spend our budget. That's been a trend of local government over many years. In Ipswich Council, we've got a lot better at that over the last couple of years. We still probably underspent our capital budgets in total generally. So that's what we're trying to make sure we put in place moving forward, so that we don't not deliver the capital program, which means then there's underspend for the year.
Okay, but where you do identify key savings?
Savings, yes.
Do you redirect those?
Yes, what we would do is
additional...
either to additional works or to cover projects that are running over. So that's when we look at the total program level, and as mentioned, we might come back to committee here and say, listen, we've got these savings, but we're going over on these programs. Can we move the budget? Or if there is savings that we identify and there still is capacity to deliver. So one of the big issues is obviously, yes, there might be savings, but does the delivery team have capacity to design and deliver still within the current financial year? Or we can take those savings into, and you could allocate that into next year's budget, for example. And you can then increase as next year's capital program if there's true savings in this year. So that's the movement that we'll do as we go through the year, and as we do potentially budget amendments, and also in next year's capital program delivery, we will come forward with you and say what's the likely final position for this year, and then does that mean that programs are slipping into next year or bringing forward programs. So that's, yeah, it's quite a moving feast through the year, but we will bring that back to committee for visibility.
One point I think is worth making a comment on is you generally see in civil projects reasonably large variations, because the fundamentals of what we do is working in the ground, and so there are unknown conditions, and the three primary things are soil type, contamination, so you might go into a site and find asbestos or previous industrial contamination, which dramatically increases the cost of the excavation. And the third is utilities and the costs of relocation of utilities that may not be identified. So that could be water or telecom or power. And so you see more than a typical what you would see in a house construction type thing, which can be quite tightly assessed. Civil is always, unfortunately, at the mercy of vagaries as you work underground.
Any other questions? CFO, I know Councillor Johnick's questions and Councillor Doyle's as well. And I know with these, we only look at the first 2 months of the financial year and look at the program level. The variances are quite wide. I look at asset rehabilitation. The spend there is down 19% from what we budgeted to actuals, which does, I guess, the first 2 months, but it does concern me that if, especially asset rehabilitation is often happening in our established suburbs, the older suburbs of Ipswich, to make sure that their footpaths and roads are being fixed. And I see that corporate facilities spend is up 30% year to date as well. Flood mitigation drainage, the year to date is down 19%, especially with the La Nina. I guess just letting you know that obviously we're only the first 2 months, but obviously probably next month we'll probably look at it more with more detail as the financial year progresses.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, we can explore into those areas with you, and some of that will be around programming, and then what we forecast to be the expend in the program and what's now actually coming out through the detailed scheduling and design. So that will be some of our phasing that we'll do through budget amendments. But yeah, absolutely. We need to both look at the year-to-date expenditure, not just also the forecast completion, because yes, otherwise you end up with just a big backlog in the last 3 months, which becomes difficult to deliver.
Jacob.
Absolutely.
And I'm looking at some of the top forecast variances where obviously there's been some savings or efficiencies. You've mentioned Robertson Road.
Yes.
Obviously Kennedy Drive, Redbank Plains, as well as South Station Road and Dorothy Street and Silkstone. Do we have an indication, was it an efficiency, or what was the reason for the underspend, and how do we make sure we learn from that to continue that?
Yeah, I would need to take that on notice. I don't know off the top of my head. Some of those will be what was included in the design estimates and what's now in the detailed designs. But we would need to take that on board and come back on those specifics as to what would be behind those. But yes, I think there's always lessons learned as to how we better estimate and how we better design as we go forward to minimise those.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. Any other questions for the CFO? Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask for Mr. Dill to come forward? Morning again, Mr. Dill.
Good morning.
Obviously, you know from our briefings and workshops that we're very much looking at the eye of the money that ratepayers pay to the people of Ipswich. So when we're looking at projects that are costing less, I'm very keen to see what are some of the trends that are occurring, why is this happening, and how to make sure we get best bang for buck for people's rate, for the rates that we receive. So these projects such as Robertson Road, Kennedy Drive, South Station Road, Dorothy Street and the others in the top 10, were there efficiencies there, or what were the reasons for the...
It's a good question, Mayor. It can vary. As Mr. Keach has indicated earlier, it depends on the project site. It could be through efficiency, through procurement. It can be through identification of innovative design and modifying a design that will suit. And it could also just be an assumption that was made during the concept design stage around what might be encountered, and therefore an overestimation of the construction costs, and it's just when it comes to actual costs, it's lower. So it does vary. We are always, as a delivery agent, we go through all life cycles of the project, so from concept, design, detail design, procurement, and then construction. Obviously in the construction phase you are at risk of variations in costs due to, as the CEO has mentioned, the geology, and that is what we refer to as latent conditions, and there are typically allowances made for that. However, over the entire duration of a project there is more susceptibility to variation as the design evolves and we become more familiar with that. We could invest far more money in site investigations like geotechnical investigations and so forth to try and mitigate that risk, but we believe we have the balance about right to try and get the right estimate, bearing in mind that we're looking at a small number here against our 400, on average projects per year. So we are looking for innovative design. We're looking for changes to standards to try and optimise our spend. Procurement efficiencies obviously is a big one, and also we're pushing towards that 3-year delivery phasing now, which will help improve our estimations because we are doing our early works and our design prior to the delivery year.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Dill. Any other questions of Mr. Dill? No? Thank you very much. Any discussion? Yes, Councillor John.
Through you, Chair. I just wanted to actually to also note that in the comments section relating to the movement of the key projects, they actually mention weather as well, so that they're moving large projects around multiple years to minimise weather risks. So that there could be an influential movement there as well, which is understandable.
definitely. Any other discussion points? Then I'll put this recommendation, just because we had a long discussion, just to remind you, it's the monthly financial performance report on the Infrastructure and Environment Department's capital portfolio budget for 2020-2021 to be received, and the contents noted. It's already been moved and seconded. I'll now put it to the vote if there's no other discussion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous. Thank you. We'll now move on to the next item, which is the exercise of delegation report. And the recommendation is that the report be received and the contents noted. May I have a mover and a seconder? Mover, thank you very much. And a seconder, Deputy Mayor, thank you very much. Are there any, we'd like to call up the relevant council officer. Are there any questions? Or everyone's satisfied with the, no, this is just a noted recommendation? No questions? I'll open it up for discussions. Discussion on any of the... There be no discussion, I'll then put that to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. I see it's unanimous. Thank you very much. We're now moving on to our last item, which is the court action status report. And the recommendation is that this report is received and the contents noted. May I please have a mover and Councillor Queensland, and a seconder, I think Councillor Ireland. Thank you very much. Would I like to call the relevant council officer to ask questions of the court action?
Yeah.
Yes, Councillor.
A couple of questions. Yeah.
May we please have the relevant council officer, not court officer, council officer to the lectern, please. Good morning. May I please get you say your name and your title?
Anthony Bowles, Acting Development Planning Manager.
This is your first time coming to?
This council, yes.
This council, yes. Thank you. I'll head over to Councillor Tully and ask his question.
It's just a basic sort of question. There's a couple of appeals here, and they're not of recent origin, but I need to clarify that the reasons for the deemed refusal appeals, because the applicant wouldn't extend the time. Is that still an ongoing problem? Was it because of lack of staff, that we couldn't meet the timeframes under the legislation that triggered the deemed refusal?
Through the chair, it's really a matter of the way the Planning Act works, and it isn't necessarily a lack of staff that results in that situation. Typically, we seek an extension on the decision time frame. If that's not granted, then we're in the space of a deemed refusal. We're generally able to make a decision within the time frames. It depends on the nature of the decision or the nature of the matter. So in the case of the waste matters, it's a little bit more difficult for us to make a decision on an application when we have other applications that are in appeal, and we basically the decisions that we make are depending on some outcomes of other appeals. So we can put to the applicant, look, extend the decision time frame until we have more information on these matters, and we can continue to make an assessment. But typically that isn't granted to us because the applicant would like to progress the matter to the next level, which is to have the application refused and heard through the court. So it's typically at the applicant's discretion to grant or not grant that extension, and the extension isn't granted on the basis that their strategy or their view to progressing the application quickly would be to go through the court.
Mm-hmm. Through the chair, the reason I'm sort of just dwelling on that a little bit is that we've got a motion to the local government conference in 10 days' time or so, which touches on this issue and giving local governments the ability to equally match the applicant's ability to put an application on hold or to extend times. So basically, what you're saying that it's a matter of the degree of complexity in particular cases, rather than any staffing or other issues which are within our control.
Through the chair, generally, obviously, more staff would improve efficiencies, the speed of assessment, but we have fairly well established procedures for making decisions. We've adapted well to the changes to the Planning Act. However, it's undeniable that there is a significant decrease in the amount of time that we have to assess our applications. Whilst we've adapted, we would definitely appreciate more time or the more ability to extend those timeframes. Often our assessment timeframes are difficult to meet, but we have managed in all circumstances to do so. The particular cases where we have these deemed refusals are by far the outlier when it comes to the strategy that we have for deciding applications within the Planning Act rules.
So through the chair, can you just clarify the current position? Is it that if it's a deemed refusal, the whole matter goes to the court? It's different from a deemed approval, which we've got 10 days to impose conditions?
Through the chair, the deemed refusal is essentially a refusal. It's really the next step is still with the applicant to actually take it to the court to appeal that decision.
Yeah.
They can live with just a refusal.
No, but someone who does.
Yeah.
Someone who does. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the whole matter is then there before the Planning Environment Court.
That's right.
Yeah, and a deemed approval if we haven't met that time frame. We've got 10 days to place conditions on still.
Through the chair, that is my understanding. I'll have to double check the exact business days, but we do have to provide conditions to the applicant in that scenario, and that generally only occurs in code accessible development applications.
Yes,
so
yes.
those timeframes are extremely critical for us
Yes.
to meet.
Yeah. And we never missed them.
No.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Tully. Mr Wells, I also notice on page 141 there's an item that is not listed there that has been highlighted, which is the purpose of the report in the background, a matter with the Springfield City Group.
Yeah. Let's give that one.
So we haven't received any briefing on this, but it states that that Council's meeting in November 2008 was resolved to amend the Ipswich planning scheme by making amendments to Part 14 to the Springfield Structure Plan, and Springfield City Group has made a representation to the State Government that the amendments as adopted by Council should not be approved, and has suggested alternate wording regarding the rights and responsibilities of developers and landowners in the Springfield Structure Plan. Is there any update on that particular? That's not commercial or legal in confidence?
I'm afraid I'd have to seek extra information to respond to that question.
Mr Tabula? In that case, any other questions of Mr Bowles? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I'll call on Mr Tabula. Morning. Set your name and your title, please.
Peter Tabulo, General Manager of Planning and Regulatory Services. Mayor, you'll see in the comments in the report that there was a subsequent bill put forward by the government with respect to matters in Springfield. It's a very long titled bill that doesn't have much.
Forest and Wind Farm Development Bill 2020.
Correct. But in the back of that bill there was some sections relating to Springfield, which basically addressed the matters that we had put forward to the government with respect to that original application from Springfield. We're in the present steps to have that matter withdrawn from the state.
Right.
Because it no longer has any force of effect. The passage of time and the enactment of the legislation has basically made our request null and void.
What was the issue of contention?
It was, as I've mentioned previously, around about the involvement of Springfield City Group in the development application process, and where they come in and have their say with respect to applications being made by third parties and the like. That's in very broad, simple terms.
And how does this bill resolve that?
It now sets out a series of steps and procedures whereby applicants are obliged within a certain period of time to seek advice from Springfield, and that information then has to come to us as part of the consideration of the application.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? No. Thank you very much, Mr Tabulo. I now open up for discussion. There being no discussion, I'll put the matter to the vote that this report is received and noted. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. It's unanimous. And with that, I will now close the meeting at 10:14. Thank you very much.